much. My name is Joachim Schleich from Fraunhofer Institute Systems and Innovation Research, and also from Grenoble Ecole de Management. And I'm the micro guy. So I will be presenting you the findings, not all the findings, but at least some of the core findings from the multi-country survey that Barbara was already talking about. And just to give you a little bit of an idea about the motivation of this project, how it came about that we wrote this proposal, which then luckily got funded. It was a European Council decision in 2014, when back then the target was the 27% energy efficiency target for 2030. As of yesterday, we know that this target will hopefully be much tighter, maybe 40%, but 27% was the number that was discussed back then. And the analysis underlying this target, or where this target came about, was heavily depending on the discount rates, on the so-called subjective discount rates or implicit discount rates. And they are used in these models to govern decisions by households in particular, but also companies and so on. And in this project, we will concentrate on households. And these discount rates, or the data that went into these models, was taken from observed behavior. And just to give you a little bit of an idea what we mean by implicit discount rates, because that's crucial to the understanding of the project, of the entire project. This will be like the red line that will carry us over the next 1.5 hours. Suppose there's a decision maker which has to decide whether he or she wants to purchase this appliance. Looks a bit like a microwave. Let's suppose, for simplicity, it has upfront costs of 120 euros, annual energy costs of €1, and a lifetime of €1. So planned obsolescence. So this breaks down after 1 year, just for the sake of the argument. The alternative is to invest in appliance B, which has lower upfront costs, only 100 euros, but a little bit higher energy costs. It also lasts for 1 year. And to calculate this implicit discount rates under some simplifying assumption, if consumer prefers B, the one with the lower upfront cost but the higher, let's say, energy costs, you can calculate the minimum implicit discount rate that would make the choice for appliance B rational. When would this make sense? So you set up an equation and say, okay, if in this case, something like the net present value of investing in B exceeds something like the net present value, because actually this is in utility space. Economists think in terms of utilities. But under some simplifying assumptions, we can do this kind of analysis. And if we do this, we come up with a value of 0.5. But what's clear is the higher these implicit discount rates are, the stronger I discount future payments, or in this case, energy savings. So higher implicit discount rates are typically disfavorable for energy efficiency investments, to the extent that they come up with higher initial costs, but they save energy expenditure over the lifetime of the product. So that's the idea. When you look at the literature and look at the empirical findings, what's out there, and you see some economists or engineering economic analysis, they come up with these implicit discount rates of, for some technologies, up to 300% here for refrigerators. So you see a wide range, and the levels that you actually see are much higher than, let's say, the cost of capital in the market. So is this a sign of irrational behavior, potentially? Because you could go to the bank and borrow that kind of money and then make a profitable decision and invest in the energy efficient technology. So back to the modeling part, the key underlying, or the key model that the European Commission uses for these impact assessments is the PRIMES model, and back then it used a discount rate of 17.5%, which is substantially lower than some of the rates you see in the literature. But the point is here, it was the same for all technologies and all households. And that's what kind of got us started. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we have to start thinking what's actually behind this discount rate. Is this just time preferences? Are people just impatient? They want to consume today rather than in a year from now? Or is there more behind? And that was actually the first step in our project. We kind of started to unravel what's behind this discount rate. So what are the factors behind this discount rate? The first set of, the first element in this analysis were preferences. They are black box, typically, especially to economists, but we also had psychologists in the team. It's time preferences. People are impatient. They rather consume today than tomorrow. There could be risk preferences may play a role. Maybe this is a technology I don't really know very well, or the energy cost savings are not known with certainty because prices fluctuate over time. So risk preferences may play a role. Then something that's called reference-dependent preferences, in this case loss aversion. We mean by loss aversion, it means that people don't evaluate gains and losses of the same amount in the same way. They much stronger value losses. And that's what Kahneman and Tversky called losses loom larger than gains. People may be loss averse. So they may see the initial outlay as a loss, potentially. Or people look at what others do, keeping up with the Joneses. It's like social preferences. If investing in energy efficiency is a social norm, that may drive people's behavior. Finally, using less energy typically means lower levels of global and local pollutants. So maybe some groups in the population have very strong environmental preferences, and that may also drive behavior, and that's also part of the discount rate. Then the next box, we call it predictable irrational behavior. The first element is bounded rationality. People may have all the information available, but they're just not able to handle it, to do the calculations in short time and so on. So limitation to cognitive ability may prevent people from making the right decision. Could be rational inattention. Well, maybe it's just not worth to figure out how much I can save for purchasing an LED with a particular luminosity. It may take me a couple hours to figure this out on the internet. If it's a bulb that goes into the wardrobe or the basement, which I never use. So it may just not be worth for the individual to exert this time and effort. And then there are some behavioral biases. The one we looked at in particular is the present bias or hyperbolic discounting. What do I mean by that? Suppose I ask you, would you rather have a euro today or euro 10 tomorrow? Most people would answer, I'll take the euro today, right? But if I ask you the same question, would you take the euro in half a year or euro 10 in a half a year and 1 day? Most people would say, I'll take the euro and 10 in a half a year and 1 day from now. So people don't discount the same. And that's what's called hyperbolic discounting or leading to present bias. A very strong form of discounting. And finally, the last box in this implicit discount rate picture, we call external barriers to energy efficiency. That's probably something most of you, or concepts most of you are fairly familiar with. The typical split incentives problem, landlord-tenant. Tenant doesn't have an incentive to invest, or the landlord doesn't have an incentive to invest because he's not the one benefiting from the investment in the form of lower energy costs or lack of information, transaction costs about energy efficiency potentials or the type of measures that are available, lack of capital, you cannot fund the upfront payment to insulate your house, technological risk, I already talked about it, and financial risk, I mentioned this as well. So this is our conceptual framework. And in the empirical analysis, we looked at individual factors. Do they play a role in actual people's investment decisions? So the objective of the micro-level analysis, we conducted a survey, as my colleague Barbara Schloman already pointed out, was to figure out what are the determinants, what are the factors that are related with the adoption of energy efficient technologies in households. A particular focus was on time and risk preferences, as the title of the project may have suggested, but we went far below. And that may also help explain the high implicit discount rates, or another term, or that's more the flip side of the coin, the energy efficiency paradox. It's related. Why don't people invest in technologies even though they should be profitable from an economic engineering type analysis, similar to the one, the Mickey Mouse example I put up there with the 2 types of microwaves. And then we want to see how relevant are these factors. Underlying this implicit discount rates, we want to derive some implications for modeling. Colleagues will present the findings on this, and also some implications for policymaking. For what you see in this picture, in addition to what Barbara mentioned, I should point out that these analyses were demographically representative. So these were not some kind of people we asked on the street. This was a serious analysis, representative with respect to certain household characteristics like age, income, gender, and so on, regional distributions. And in total, it was 15,000 participants. For most countries, we asked 2,000 people, so these are fairly large, also compared to previous type of surveys. Or 1,500 in countries that were a little bit smaller or a little bit more expensive. Sweden, for example. It's also a small country in terms of population. Okay, just to give you an idea what kind of methods we employed to elicit the time and risk preferences, we used 2 types of methods. One is based on experiments, and one is based on just basically asking people, how patient do you think you are? Then we see whether we get different results later on. What we used to elicit preferences for time and risk and also loss aversion, the part losses loom larger than gains. We employed multiple price list experiments. So the participants, these were online experiments, and the entire survey was online. So they saw a table that looked similar to this one, and then they had to decide whether they wanted to receive 98 euros in 6 months or receive 100 euros in 12 months. Next line, 94 euros in 6 months or receive 100 euros in 12 months. And at one point, the household is going to switch the participant. Yeah, prefers A over B or vice versa. And that allows us then to calculate something like a time discount rate. We had similar analysis for risk preferences that allows us to calculate the risk preference parameter and so on. And these experiments, I should say, they were incentivized. So they actually got the 100 euros or the 90 euros, if they picked line 3, for example, after the experiment was conducted. Of course, not everybody, because that would have been a little bit too high compared to the budget we had available. So we made a random draw. But it was important to have this incentivized experiments, because otherwise people would have an incentive to just kind of answer randomly. Okay, then we had other types of questions. Remember, we're still in the preference box. That first one, the last part, was environmental preferences. So we used established scales that were developed by some partners, in this case, Lorraine Wittmarsch from Cardiff University, called environmental identities. These are Likert scales, and people had to self-report where they think they fit into these scales. They had to mark these, and then we calculated some scores using statistical analysis. A similar question for social norms. Do you think, would your friends and family think highly of you if you purchase energy efficient technologies? One that gets into the third box, for example, was external barriers to energy efficiency, access to capital. They had to self-rate or self-categorize themselves into categories, how easily they thought they would have access to credit and loans. And then we employed these alternative methods to the experimental methods, where we asked people to self-assess their willingness to take risks, or to self-assess how patient they think they are. Okay, this is the first set of results. We report for all countries, so 2,000 observations are behind all of these numbers, or 1,500 in the case of Sweden. These are the average, so the first line, these are the means and standard deviations. The first model is an aggregate of all observations and then the individual countries' results. Here you see a standard time discounting of 0.781. Okay, what does it mean? And people are, on average, impatient. It's below 1. And this average translates into an annual discount rate of about 28%. So we get these figures for each country, and it's in the report if you want to find it. But you also see, well, first of all, well, maybe there isn't all that much difference. I was a bit surprised. I live in France. I would have thought the French are much more impatient than the Germans, but there's not much difference indeed, and Italians as well. But what you see here is there's quite some variance. So there's actually more variance within countries than between countries, at least on average. These are the findings for patients. Next one, risk aversion. Parameter alpha below 1 means that on average, population is risk averse. We don't like risk, that's to be expected. And these figures or these numbers are pretty much in line with what's been found in the literature. Also not across, I don't think there's any cross-country analysis not of that size. We're not aware of anyone having done this kind of analysis. Present bias, on average, not much. People are not really present biased on average, but many are. You see very high standard deviation. So there's quite some variance in the population. People are extremely present biased and others not so much. Loss aversion to, on average, people are highly loss averse. But again, quite some variation within the population. Okay. So this was one part of the questionnaire. We elicited this time and risk preferences, and we had a couple of other questions, items in the survey that allowed us to estimate econometric multivariate models. So for a multivariate model, you need to put something on the left-hand side. What do you want to estimate? What are you interested in? And what we are interested in is, and Barbara already pointed this out, is the adoption of 3 types of technologies. First one was LEDs, so we asked respondents, okay, when's the last time you exchanged your light bulb? We only took observations that purchased a light bulb actually, less than 2 years ago because we figured they wouldn't remember otherwise. And only if they picked an LED, that was categorized as an efficient decision. If they purchased an incandescent light bulb or a compact fluorescent light bulb or halogen, that was not an efficient choice. And on average, 41% of all purchases in our sample actually were purchases of LEDs. Energy efficient appliances, similar, we asked pretty much the big 5 white goods. And we had 2 types of questions. First, do you think you bought a top rated energy efficient appliance, or we actually asked them for the labels, assuming that they remembered or knew the label. And here about 63% answered or self-reported to have bought the most energy efficient or an energy efficient appliance on the market. So we couldn't literally go there into their apartment and check whether that's actually true, so we kind of had to believe that they were answering truly. Oops. The third measure we looked at was retrofit measures, participants, those that were eligible. So that we asked, do you have a say? Typically, these are homeowners into major refurbishment decisions in a house or household. And we asked whether certain retrofit measures were implemented within the last 10 years. And these included double glazed window or triple glazed windows, insulation of exterior or internal walls. Here's some results on the light bulbs. I cannot go through all these country-specific findings. They're in the reports that are available, will be made available. Just to give you some idea how the distribution looks like, say for France here, so 37% of the last purchase was purchase of an LED. In Germany, this figure is slightly higher, much lower in Romania or Poland, for example. Actually, no, Poland is higher, but Romania is relatively low. Or the UK, or Sweden. So we have some variation across countries, but also within countries. Similar for retrofit measures, most respondents didn't do anything in the last 10 years, so 62%. In some countries it was more thermal insulation, like the UK, because it's colder there than in Spain, for example, where I guess this is installation of new windows, like 20%. So this is how the data looks like. Yes, Linz? Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, so multivariate analysis. This was our dependent variable, and then we had some covariates. The preferences I talked about before, then the behavioral bias, the present bias. Then we had data on split incentives, where they were renting or where they were planning to move out in a couple of years. Because if you know you're moving out in 2 or 3 years, you have a lower incentive to invest. And then the typical social demographic characteristics, and also a fairly large set of dwelling characteristics. And the second set of analysis, there we wanted to know, okay, how can we identify these barriers? Which type of socioeconomic groups are more likely to suffer from certain kind of barriers or anomalies, or what kind of socioeconomic groups show particular type of preferences, like environmental identity. And I'll give you a glimpse of the results. So these are the findings from the first type of model, the multivariate analysis for LEDs, appliances, and retrofit measures. So the first box is the box that's representing the finding for the black box, the preferences, coming back to the original implicit discount rate figure. And there we see, yeah, for some patients was found to, the more patient you are, the more likely you are to invest in energy efficient technologies. We found this for retrofit and LEDs, not for appliances. And here it also depends what kind of measure we use to represent the preferences. Did we use the experiment, or did we use the Likert scale? We found some differences because they do measure different things. Risk aversion played a role for retrofit. So the more risk averse people were found to be, the less likely they were to have invested in retrofit measures in the last 10 years. Social environmental identity played a very strong role in the uptake of all 3 measures, and so did social norms. Behavioral biases, we found a very strong role of present bias. So extremely impatient people were less likely to have adopted all 3 measures. This was a very strong finding. External barriers, as expected, if you're renting, the user-investor bias, but for a very large sample, representative sample. So we think these results are interesting beyond the pure risk and time preference stories. This provides very strong empirical evidence that this is a strong barrier to energy efficiency. Also, what you see here is access to capital. Lack of access to capital. I will skip the social demographic and dwelling characteristics. They were all kind of as expected, or mostly as expected. Then results of the second type of analysis, where we looked at what kind of socioeconomics is correlated with the preferences or the factors underlying the discount rate, patience, risk aversion, and so on. These are the findings. These are the findings for the 8-country model. There's some heterogeneity if you look across different countries. This is the story for the overall model. And there you see, for example, okay, here access to capital, older people have better access, richer households better access, higher educated. And this is how you have to read this table. And this is typically information you have available from typical surveys, or there's statistics available. And then combining both type of analysis allows us to derive some policy implications and also recommendations for modeling. Okay, if we now look at the correlations of the socioeconomic factors, I picked 2 that are most commonly available to modelers, which is income typically, or maybe age. How that's affecting some of the key factors underlying this implicit discount rate. And is this factor lowering the implicit discount rate or increasing the implicit discount rate? So that's what we mean here by positive or negative. Negative means leads to a lower implicit discount rate. And then we see here actually for income, for most countries, and also these are results for the 8 countries models and then for the individual countries. So we ran a lot of analysis. It's a fairly consistent picture, apart from some outliers like Germany maybe for some in this case. But the overwhelming picture is that higher income households are associated with lower implicit discount rates for all of these factors. It would not be sufficient to just look at one of them, saying, oh yeah, we know richer households are more patient or whatever. That would not be enough, because you have all the other factors that could play in. So actually, this is a pretty strong finding. And similar for age, we also find, unless the effects of risk aversion is very strong, we also find that older households should have a lower implicit discount rate. Conclusions. I still have a minute? Thanks. Okay, so the first take-home message from the picture we showed, implicit discount rates are more than just time preferences. They reflect other factors, risk aversion, present bias, environmental preferences, social preferences, and all the barriers we're familiar with, from lack of information to split incentives and lack of capital. There are implications for policy making. First of all, policymakers should know the underlying factors, because just observing or just seeing that the implicit discount rate is high doesn't tell you anything about the underlying source. So it doesn't really tell you much about what kind of policies you should apply. If you don't know the source, it's kind of hard to come up with a solution. And then we distinguish between two types of policy interventions. One is we call directed policy intervention. So it's directly trying to address the external barriers. So they're external to the decision maker, so not preferences or behavioral related biases. And just to stay with the example that you've seen here, access to capital was positively related with income, education, and urban households. So some policies that are trying to address this lack of capital, which has been driving or impeding the take-up of energy-efficient technologies in our samples in all countries, they should target on low-income, less educated, and non-urban households. The second type of policy intervention we call reactive policy intervention. It's like you're taking the preferences as given, and so you're not trying to actively reduce the barriers, but you're taking the preference. You know people are risk averse, you know they're impatient, some are credibly impatient, they're hyperbolic discounting, and then you design the policy specific for these households. So an example would be giving rebates rather than tax credits. If people are particularly impatient, that would be a palatable policy option for very impatient households, because they don't want to wait until they file their taxes in a year from now. They'd rather get the cash right away. So what we find here, for example, is less educated individuals more strongly discount future payments. So the type of policies that I just described here, that's changing the payment schemes of the support mechanism, they should be targeted at households with low formal education. Final implication for modeling, and that will be the transition to the next speakers in particular. What we found here, first of all, is implicit discount rates should vary. It should not be one fact, ideally speaking, not just limitations to modeling and so on, but having 17.5% for all households and all technologies doesn't really capture well the heterogeneity among decision makers and also across technologies. So they should vary by household characteristics, technologies, and countries. And lower implicit discount rates for higher income and older households. That's one of the take-home messages for the modelers in this room. Okay, thank you. I'd be happy to answer your questions, and all the reports that this was based on, 3 or 4 of the reports, different findings, you can find them on the website. Thank you.
We have time for questions, so I will go around with the microphone, and yeah, a little less than 10 minutes for questions and discussion. So just raise your hand.
Kirsten Dyhr Mikkelsen from EA Energy Analysis. Did you find any surprises?
Yeah, if you work empirically, well, you have your conceptual model in the beginning, and then you work empirically. I think everybody who works empirically should be surprised. Otherwise, I'd be suspicious of someone rigging the data. But yeah, we were surprised. Actually, I was surprised to see that risk aversion did not play a stronger role That was one of the surprises. Our explanation was actually what you have, it's energy efficiency. Yeah, you have technological risk, maybe financial risk of the project, but energy efficiency is also an investment. It safeguards you against future electricity price fluctuations. So it's actually, even conceptually, it's not quite clear which direction this should go. Yeah. The second surprise was that, more from an academic perspective, that the two measures that we used to elicit risk, they were not giving us the same answers. And also, we would have expected them to be much stronger correlated. So the self-reported assessments, the Likert scales, and the experiments, they don't lead to the same results. Also, they measure different things, probably. Yeah? The Likert scales, more general perception of risk, versus doing these experiments. Maybe this is more the pure financial risk that they're able to capture. So these are different types of risk dimensions they are capturing, and that got us to think a little bit more along those lines. So these were some of the surprises, apart from the fact that the Italians and the French are just as patient as the Germans.
So we have one question here first from Peter Buck, and then I have another one there, and a fourth one there. Peter?
Peter Buck, yeah, it's a very simple question. You said older households. Is that the age of the people living there or the age of the building? I think both things could be interesting, but you maybe mean the first thing, older age of the people living in the house.
Yes, I meant actually the age of the person responding to our questionnaire.
Okay.
Yeah, but also control for the age of the building.
Okay.
It's building age as one of the covariates in the analysis, and that is also a very important factor, especially when it comes to renovation measures being taken up.
We have one here, please.
I have a question about energy efficiency in France. France has quite a unique situation where household heating or habitat heating is heated by electricity, which is a nonsense. It's the most inefficient system, just because France has 85% of the electricity produced by nuclear. By the way, we are waiting for a major accident, so everybody will be cold. I see that in the diagram, the risk for efficiency improvement in France is very low. What is your opinion, and how do you see, first of all, how France could improve? Because, by the way, there's a certain investment from electrical heating to water heating or oil heating. And you see an improvement in your analysis, an increase of risk, an increase of investment?
Okay, well, first, I mentioned, well, I do live in France, so I really hope your first prediction is not going to come through anytime soon. And also the type of risk we're measuring here, I think, is different from the type of risk that would be associated with catastrophic accidents. But also living in France, I realized that, and being German, I realized that there are cultural differences across countries to the way they perceive risk from nuclear power plants. The same is, by the way, true for shale gas or carbon capture and storage. There are differences. In France, I think 1 out of 3 heating systems in the private sector are, as you correctly mentioned, are fueled by electricity. What we found in terms of what we found, I mean, not so much related to risk, but what we found in some back of the envelope analysis for France, actually, many homeowners in France are, they do lack of capital. If you ask that in Germany, if you're a homeowner, you're rich typically. Yeah? In France, that's apparently not the case. Also, if you look at the billings, that seems to be an issue. Yeah? The poor homeowners in Germany would think this is an oxymoron. Yeah? For France, this is not the case. Yeah? So I think targeting these kind of households could be an effective way of addressing lack of energy efficiency or improving energy efficiency in the building sector.
Thank you. I am French, but I will not answer to that question, except that so I am against, of course, electric heating. The choice of electric heating is because the in-front investment is very low compared to gas condensing boiler. So we know that the price of electricity is low in France, half compared to Germany, and it's flat. So one of the reasons we are going through electric heating, we have a lot of advertising and pressure from EDF, but further in front investment it's low, and we have some insurance about that the price is stable. However, my question is more or less linked to that. We are modeling, we have a model like Invert, we are developing that. One of the differences is we are implementers. I work at ADEME, so we are not researchers. And our views on the type of numbers we put in the discount rate and so on are a little bit, let's say, different. My question is, but we fully agree that we have to moderate our discount rate according to type of building, age, etc., type of household, and you mentioned technologies. I fully agree on that, but did you go up to the type of energy for the same technology? For instance, for space heating, I think we have to make a difference between gas condensing boiler, wood boiler, electric heating, and let's say fuel condensing boiler. Do you ask this question if the type of energy will change the discount rate? And just to answer to your question, in fact, we don't. The new law doesn't support subsidizing for electric heating. So the new subsidized for efficient heating is for condensing gas boilers. So there is no subsidies to promote electric heating, at least at governmental level.
Short answer, no, we don't have that number, but we'd be glad to do a study for ADEME and try to figure this out more deeply. I think it's important, yes. I think it's important. Of course it's important. Otherwise we wouldn't be interested in doing a study.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. From your analysis, does it you have evidence if income is really influencing discount rates both for owners and tenants, or you're not able to control for that? And a second question, if possible, but I'm aware of short timing, what's behind the different result for Germany regarding the income being a factor influencing IDR?
Yes, we do. Thanks, Serena, for the question. Yes, we do have that. We do have that data and that kind of analysis, and we can look at individual countries. How maybe that was too quick, or only gave actually just from the data I've given you, you could not decipher this. But we do have basically the correlations of income with these individual factors underlying the discount rate. And then we could see which one is particularly driven by income in France versus Germany, for example. Yeah, do have the time.